Where is God in this silence? The cross stands, but the war isn't over. Love chose to bleed here. The Father had not forgotten his children. Welcome to Prayer Station, revealing what few know about Saturday, the sacred pause between the cross and the resurrection. No miracles, no declarations, just a silence thick as ash. The universe seemed to hold its breath. No more hammering of nails, no more cries of agony, only a massive stone sealing something unnamed. Saturday had no events, no witnesses, only a void between what had ended and what had not yet begun. But in that void, when everything seemed to have stopped, he began to move. Not upward, but downward, into a place no one has ever returned from to tell the tale. And in that place began a journey like no other. Saturday is a void, but also a turning point between death and life. A road is being opened, unseen by human eyes, but watched by all of heaven. Friday, humanity hung the Holy One on a cross, a sentence with no defense, an execution without evidence. From the dusty road leading up to Golgotha, to the cry, "It is finished," echoing at noon, something in the fabric of the universe cracked. Then came Sunday, and he rose. But right now on Saturday, no one knew that yet, and because they didn't know, they began to despair. Friday was the shock, Sunday was the miracle, but Saturday was the wound still bleeding, still open. It was the space where faith was tested, where hope fell silent, where questions no longer receive answers. The disciples had scattered. The women with their spices didn't know whether they were preparing for the living or the dead. And those who crucified him thought it was over. But in the invisible realm, where human eyes cannot see, a sacred movement was unfolding, unlike anything before. Because while humanity wept, heaven did not stand still. It wasn't that heaven turned away. It wasn't that God was powerless. It was that he was moving, but not far. He was going deep, deeper than every failure, deeper than every sin, deeper than the freshly sealed grave. He didn't wait for dawn to step out of the tomb. He chose the darkness to begin the journey of reclaiming. Because there was one thing he hadn't yet done on the cross: touch the very end of separation. And that place was not on the surface. It was beneath, far beneath, a place humans cannot reach, where light had never been named, where souls were held captive in forgetfulness. Saturday seemed like a pause, but it was heaven whispering, "Now is the time for me to enter the place no one has dared to go." It's not the earth that is trembling, it's the underworld opening up, to let the living one step into the lowest depths where mankind has ever fallen. No one witnessed it. No account was written. No flicker of light to guide the way. Only one truth was unfolding in the unseen realm. He was no longer on the surface of the earth. The one who once declared, "I am the resurrection and the life." He was now entering the very domain where death reigned. Not as a victim dragged down in shame, not as a soul pulled into judgment. He stepped in, deliberately, intentionally, unshakably, like a king, not coming to seize a throne, but to reclaim what had been stolen. Hell wasn't ready for this. It was used to soothe souls arriving in fear, dragged down in sin, screaming in helplessness. But this time, no one screamed. Only quiet, steady footsteps, echoing through the deepest layers of darkness. From Sheol, where souls waited in silence, to Hades, a prison without form, to Gehenna, a place of fire and unending ashes, and finally to the very border of complete separation, the lake of fire. He passed through each realm, not with thunder, not with a sword. He carried wounds, and those very wounds became the weapon that made the deepest darkness tremble. Hell didn't know what to do. It had never received a holy one. It had never faced a soul without sin. Because this wasn't just a soul. This was the living one, the one even death could not hold. When he stepped upon the foundations of the underworld, no miracle burst forth, no angel appeared, no proclamation echoed from the heavens, only a presence. So weighty the darkness began to unravel on its own, not because of blinding light, but because light had set foot where no scarred holiness had ever been. He didn't come to inspect. He came to tear through, to touch what history had buried and forgotten. Because beneath every layer of hell were sighs that had never reached heaven. There are souls who've never been named. There are cries no one has ever heard. There are places in the universe where even if you scream with all your might, your voice still never reaches heaven. Not because God doesn't listen, but because no one had ever stepped down deep enough to carry that cry upward. Until today. He didn't come as a priest, he brought no doctrine, he didn't preach, he simply showed up. And that presence alone was enough to tear through a silence that had lasted for millennia. He came for the souls who had never been named, not because they never hoped, but because no one had ever reached the place where they were imprisoned. Souls locked away in the stillness of forgotten history. No gravestones, no eulogies, only sighs, shattered in the haze of the unseen. He didn't need to ask who they were. He already knew. These were the ones who walked in darkness. Not because they chose sin, but because they never knew there was light to choose. No one guided them. No one rescued them. No promise had ever touched them. Until the Word became flesh and now become a wound deep enough to reach the pit. He didn't ask them to pray. He didn't set conditions for escape. He simply came close. And when holiness draws near, it's not fear that spreads, but hope that stirs. A hope without words, without a clear shape, just a flicker inside a soul that thought it had already shattered. Each buried sob, long lost beneath the dust of forgetting, began to echo again, not in sound, but in the realization. Someone has come. Some souls had never believed. Yet somehow they waited, not knowing what they were waiting for, only sensing that something wasn't finished. And when he stood before them, no introduction was needed. They knew instantly. This is the one their souls had always longed for in silence, even if they'd never known his name, because in his presence, every silent question finds its answer. Not through reason, but through the eyes. Eyes that bore wounds, eyes that had seen it all and still drew near. But in the lowest place, there weren't only souls waiting. There was a power, silent, patient, cunning, that had been sitting there since the beginning. And now, it lifts its head. He had drawn near to the forgotten souls. But in a deeper layer still, it wasn't the waiting. It was a being, one that had always hidden behind the shadows. No grotesque form like the legends say, no shrieking like the enemies we expect. It sat, like an ancient legal machine, cold, orderly, emotionless. Before him lay layers upon layers of records. Charges were written down without a single misplaced period, sentences never erased, cold-blooded evidence of every soul that had ever failed. Sheol, Hades, Gehenna, the lake of fire, each place a dimension of separation. Not just spiritual geography, but degrees of rupture between God and humanity. Each layer stood for something lost, innocence defiled, trust betrayed, justice twisted, the image of God in man distorted beyond recognition. And right there, the oldest darkness from the beginning revealed its face. It didn't scream. It didn't have to. It spoke only through records. It repeated only failures. Every secret never spoken, yet still documented. This is what he did. This is where she wandered. This is the sin repeated 1,000 times. You can't take them. The law is written. None may undo it. There were no threats, just the solid reasoning of justice cut off from mercy. And before those accusations, the living one didn't argue. He didn't defend. He didn't plead. He simply raised his hand. On that hand still the mark of the nail. The wound is still open, the sign of a sentence already served. Not for himself, but for every name being recited. No words, just a gesture. And the blood began to speak, not in shouts, just one word echoing through the spirit realm. Paid. And in that very moment, no battle was needed, no scepter, no angelic army, just love, wounded but unresentful. And the foundations of hell's authority, began to crack. Hell had never witnessed a dead man enter to reclaim. But now, the one with the wounds did not need to speak further. His very presence was a declaration enough to shake the realm of the dead. No need for argument, no need for rebuttal. No angel had to descend to affirm it. Because he said nothing, he simply extended his hand, and the nail in that hand became a verdict that ran counter to the entire machinery of accusation. Not to erase the truth, but to rise above the law with something older than sin itself. Love that chose to bear it all. Hell had never seen this before. Its strength had always been in the absence of a defender. But now, one who needed no defense walked in as if he carried the weight of all, not through words, but through the silence that had passed through the crucifixion. And that silence was not weakness. It was the strength of one who knew he had already won. He didn't come to persuade, he came to reveal that every accusation had been nailed to him. Every piece of evidence is buried in his blood, and every sentence, once struck with certainty, now had no authority to be enforced. Not because there was no guilt, but because guilt had been carried. Not because hell didn't exist, but because he had entered it before any soul ever would. There was no new decree, only a holy presence in ancient darkness. And that, alone, shook the very structure of the underworld. What once seemed immovable began to fracture. No one touched it, no one shouted, no force compelled it. But silent love had pierced the deepest place and done what no sword had ever accomplished. It dismantled the power of the accuser, because the last name left in the records, the last sin not yet forgiven, the last forgotten soul, was met with eyes that refused to turn away. And in that spiritual earthquake, every layer of darkness began to retreat. Not because it feared annihilation, but because it could no longer stand before the light. Hell could not hold one who had never sinned. And now, his hand reaches into the very place where mankind once dropped the crown of dominion. Not to steal, but to reclaim what was always his. Hell didn't know what to do with holiness. It was used to groaning, to shattered souls, to eyes filled with despair. It was used to hold those who had no defense. It was used to being the final place where no one had the right to speak back. But now, one had entered not carrying weapons, only bearing wounds, and that presence was a silent declaration of war. No trumpet blast, no army marching behind. Only a holy soul stands in the middle of a cursed realm, and every layer of hell began to tremble. Because this was not a soul dragged down by guilt. This was the one without sin who carried every sentence as his own. The accusations began to rise. Here is the list of his sins. Here is what he thought, what he did, what he hid. Here is what he never confessed. Here is the curse he must bear. These words weren't screamed. They were read, line by line, word by word, with the terrifying precision of justice cut off from mercy. No demon shrieked. Only cold records turned as if heaven could offer no rebuttal. But when the accusations reached their peak, he remained silent. Because the only answer... There was a hand bearing the mark of a nail, just one gesture, just one wound that refused to close, and the entire realm of darkness fell silent. A silence not of defeat, but because that holiness had unraveled every argument. No one shouted, "We've lost!" But every dark entity knew they could not hold a soul marked by the fullness of sacrifice. Because at the cross every charge had already been borne. Every accusation had found a place to land. And now, he stood at the very center of all darkness, not to defend, but to reclaim. Because something was lost in the Garden of Eden, a right that once belonged to humanity then was stolen by the fall. And now, at the very heart of death, the living one reaches out to take back the key that hell never had the right to keep. Some things cannot be stolen, they can only be dropped. And from the day mankind fell, a key has been in the wrong place. Not made of metal, not forged by human hands, but formed by a covenant between God and humanity. A right once given to Adam, to rule, to enter, to walk with life. But when man chose the forbidden fruit, that key slipped from his hand and the door was locked from the inside. Since then, humanity has lived behind a closed door, believing it could no longer enter the holy place. And now, at the very center of hell, the living one reaches out his hand, not to snatch, not to seize with authority, but to take back what had always been his. Hell did not resist. It could not. Because no one can argue with a wound that has bled. No one objected, not even Satan, the one called the accuser, remained silent. Because now, he wasn't just walking out of hell. He was walking out with power. And in his hand was not a sword, but a key. Not just one, but many. Each key represents something once lost. The key to life, the key to forgiveness, the key to communion with God, and the key to the restoration of man's spiritual identity, no longer symbolic, but the authority to determine the destiny of souls. Because now, he doesn't just carry life, he carries the way to life, and he doesn't keep them for himself, he carries them to give them back. And when the one who holds the keys walked out of hell, the veil that had hidden the most holy place for generations was torn, not from bottom to top, but from top to bottom. A new space was opening amid an old world when the one who held the keys walked out of hell. The realm of the dead fell silent, but on the earth a tearing sound echoed through the temple. Not a human voice, not human hands pulling from the bottom, but an invisible sword from heaven, ripping the veil that once stood between God and humanity. That veil had once covered the most holy place, a space no one could enter except one high priest, and only once a year. He would enter trembling, carrying the blood of a sacrifice, interceding for the sins of an entire nation. And if his heart wasn't clean, he could die inside before he ever spoke a word. But that day, the veil was torn, from top to bottom, from heaven to earth, from glory to dust, from absolute holiness to flawed humanity. No longer a barrier, now an invitation. No longer the blood of goats and lambs, because the true blood had been poured. No more rituals of outer cleansing, because inner forgiveness had begun. No more human representatives on our behalf, because God Himself had stepped out. He was no longer behind the veil, no longer hidden in incense and laws. He stepped out of the most holy place to meet us in the streets, the crowds, the human heart. And in the middle of an old world ruled by sin, division, and fear, a new space opened. Not built with bricks and mortar, not guarded by human gatekeepers, but birthed by grace, by love that was pierced, by light that touched the darkest place, a space that requires no credentials to enter, only a broken heart, a space not for the perfect, but for those who know they need healing. That space, amid a fractured, chaotic world, now burns quietly inside those who dare to believe. God is no longer far, because in His hand are not just keys that lead to life, but many keys. Each one represents something that humans thought they could never get back. He didn't walk out of hell with spoils of war. He walked out with restoration, and in His hand, there wasn't just one key, but many. Each key, forged by covenant, sealed with blood, validated by the cross, and now carried to unlock what humanity once lost. The key of life. For the souls who thought they had died in their sin, the wanderers among the graves of memory, believing that life was something found only in books. The key of forgiveness. For the murderer, the betrayer, the girl who had an abortion, the father who walked away from his child. For all who believed they had gone too far to ever return. The key to the most holy place, once reserved for the chosen few, now given to the formerly imprisoned, to those who believed holiness was forever out of reach. And still more keys. The key of identity, the key of true worship, the key that unlocks the doors long shut within the human heart. He did not carry a doctrine to dissect. He carried authority to give away. Because He did not come only to save, He came to restore. To the woman caught in adultery, worth. To the tax collector despised by all, a new identity. To the thief beside the cross, a promise. To each of us, a way back. The key to life is not in the hands of priests, not in education or bloodlines, not handed down by tradition. It rests in the hands of the one who descended to the very depths to make sure no one was forgotten. And when He rose from the darkest place, those keys began to unlock not just one great door, but thousands of doors and thousands of souls. And when the first door swung open, the forgotten no longer sat in silence. They began to rise, not as prisoners stumbling out of prison, but as citizens of a kingdom newly restored. He didn't walk out alone. He came to open the doors and lead out those who had waited in silence. A procession, not loud, not chaotic, but something radiant echoed in their footsteps. Abraham, who left his homeland at the call of an unseen voice. Isaac, who once lay on the altar without a scream. Jacob, who wrestled with the angel in the night. David, who wept in dark caves and sang in lonely fields. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, prophets who spoke truths no one was ready to believe. They lived in promises yet to be fulfilled. They walked through shadows yet held on to faith. And now, when the one who holds the keys flung open the gates of death, they rose, not like prisoners staggering out of a cell, not with terror in their eyes, but like the people of a kingdom just restored. No escorting armies, no glittering crowns, but a quiet light began to spread along the corridors of hell. Because everywhere he passed, life began to bloom. Even the thief on the right side of the cross, the one who whispered with his final breath, "Remember me," he was now among them, not because he understood everything, but because he believed. This was no scattered crowd. It was a procession, a stream of souls marked by hope, led not by angelic hosts, but by the one who walked through death and left no corpse behind. No eyes on earth saw it, no camera recorded it, no headline reported it. But in the spirit realm, every power bowed low, because this had never happened since the beginning of creation. The dead were no longer held captive. They were called by name and led out in glory. But there is another hell, not buried in the depths of the earth, but buried deep within the human heart. And if he could open doors in the realm of the dead, he can also open the locked doors within us. Hell was once the darkest place in human history. But it's not the only dark place, because there is another hell, one that lives inside the human heart. No flames, no visible chains. Yet it holds countless souls captive. It's locked away memories, wounds that have never been touched. Fears too familiar to name, yet they never leave. No one tied you up. You bound yourself with the words of the past. I'm not good enough. I don't deserve it. I'm broken, beyond repair. You go to church. You sing about freedom. You pray about the light. But inside, it's still a room without windows. No one sees it. But God does. And the one who truly descended into hell, it is also standing before the prison inside you. Not with condemnation, but with the same eyes that looked at a thief and still promised paradise. He didn't come to interrogate. He came to rescue you from yourself. Because the real chains don't clink. They lie still in your mind until you forget you're even bound. That bad habit you call a personality. That rage you excuse as instinct. That wound you've labeled normal. They form a silent hell where even your prayers never make it past your throat. But if he could shatter the gates of the grave, then the door of your heart is not too great a challenge for him. Only one thing remains. Will you open it? Because true love doesn't kick the door down. It knocks and waits. Waits for the one inside to be brave enough to whisper, "You're welcome to come in." True love doesn't break in. It doesn't smash the door. It doesn't threaten with punishment. True love simply knocks, softly, just enough for you to hear, if your heart still knows how to feel, but never loud enough to drown out the noise if you're busy trying to avoid it. He doesn't stand there with eyes of judgment. He stands like someone who still remembers you, even when you've tried to forget yourself. And that knock, it's not the first time. He knocked on the day you broke. He knocked on the night your pillow was soaked in tears. He knocked when you thought no one could ever understand you. He knocked in the loneliness of a crowded room. He knocked while you sang about him but felt nothing inside. He has never forced his way in. He only waits. Waits for an honest sigh. Waits for the moment you stop pretending. Waits until there's nothing left to hold on to but the courage to open the door. He doesn't need you to be perfect. He doesn't need you to be worthy. He only needs you to be real. Because true love doesn't pull. Love invites. He opened every gate in the realm of the dead, but he will not force open the door of your heart. Because that door, it can only be opened from the inside, and when he says, "I've opened the door," now it's time for you to come out. It's not a command, it's the sound of your name. You can remain silent, you can turn away. He will still stand there. But if today you listen, deep within, you might just hear that knock is still echoing. And if you hear that knock, you don't have to understand it all. You just need a small reply, one honest sentence, one prayer, like a key placed back into the hands of the one still waiting at your door. You don't have to understand it all. You don't need the perfect words. You don't need eloquence. You just need to be real. Because the one standing outside the door of your heart, he's not waiting for a polished sermon. He's waiting for a sincere word. Even a whisper. It can be the beginning of freedom. He truly descended into hell. He truly broke the chains. He truly brought back the keys. And now, the key is resting on the tip of your tongue. A prayer, small, but if spoken from a heart that knows it needs saving, then it's no longer just words. It's the sound of a lock clicking open. You don't have to wait for Easter. You don't have to go to church. You don't need anyone to lay a hand on you. All you need is you and a moment brave enough to tell the truth. Lord, if you truly went to the depths for me, if you truly opened the gates of hell, then today, please open the door of my heart. I'm not hiding anymore. I'm not running anymore. I'm not good enough, but I need you. Call my name and lead me out of me. No miracle in the sky, no fire from heaven, but if you just whispered that, then the first door is already opened, because sometimes new life doesn't begin with a sermon. It begins with a voice saying, "My child," that you never dared believe was calling you. And if you just said those words, this is not the end of a video. This is the first sentence in a story that Lord has been waiting to write with you. If you just whispered that prayer, this isn't the end of a video. It's the first line in a brand new story. No one knows where you're sitting right now. No one saw your tears or your silence. But he did. And he didn't walk past you, he stopped. Like a shepherd who found his lost sheep, lifted it onto his shoulders and began the journey home. This encounter doesn't demand instant change. It only asks one thing. You opened your heart. And sometimes a heart that opens becomes the doorway for someone else. So, if you've stepped out, leave a sign. It doesn't have to be long. Just one line. I stepped out. It's not a slogan. It's a small light, placed where others can see it and know they're not alone. You don't know who might read your words and find the courage to open their own heart. If something in this video stirred you, share it as a simple but meaningful act. Don't keep the light to yourself. And if you want to keep walking this journey, where stories are not just heard, but where you encounter God, subscribe to the channel. Not just to see the next video, but to say, I'm walking with the light. Thank you for staying to the end. The light is looking for hearts to enter. And today, maybe he's knocking on yours. If you hear the call, don't stay silent. Hit subscribe to continue the journey. Comment, I stepped out if you're ready. And share this video with someone who might be searching for a way out.